Welcome to another episode of the Ultimate MBA podcast. My name is Sachin Mandot, and this podcast is all about business, finance, management, immigration, and whatnot. Today, we have Ravi Handa with us. Ravi is one of the pioneering Edtech founders. So, a lot of people who would have taken CAT classes, या आपने CAT पढ़ा होगा, you would have known Handa ka Fanda. So, Ravi Handa was the founder of that. He started Edtech before it was cool. Uh, and recently, he is the poster boy of retiring early in India. Retiring early always existed in India into some circles, but for a lot of people like me who are on Twitter, Ravi Handa is the one who has introduced it to masses, so to say, and he has been covered widely by Money Control. A lot of if you search fire in Ravi Handa, you will see news links of almost all the major uh, newspapers, magazines, websites, etc. So, welcome Ravi to the podcast.
Thank you, Sachin. Thank you for having me here.
And on the top of it, Ravi is one of the nicest humans that I've met. Whom I've not met physically, but online I've been in contact with him for last 5-6 years.
Happy to hear that, man.
So Ravi, like you said it on a lot of places, but what is quick like fire? What is this thing for people who are listening it for the first time?
Sure. So the fundamental idea behind FIRE is you have enough amount of money that you don't really need to work anymore. So what you can do is you have a corpus that is built up. You keep withdrawing money from it in some way or the other so that you don't really need to work anymore. And then you decide to call it quits. You retire early at 50, 55, 40, at whatever age you have the money. So that's the fundamental idea, that you get financially independent. You are not dependent on a job, a business, or a career. So that's the FI part of it, the financial independence aspect. And then you can still continue to work even after you have become financially independent. The RE part is that you actually decide to quit and you retire early.
Okay, so basically the traditional retirement that that we used to have in our mind was like 60, 62 pay, you get retired. Now that is like retire early is that you become so much financial independent that you can choose to retire early.
True.
Uh, and do something that you like, just like you're doing on Twitter or YouTube.
That's because I don't have many other options. But
No,
I
but we love your
hope
Twitter
that
game.
I hope more people who retire early, they do something better with their time than wasting it on Twitter. But yes, it essentially gives you the freedom to do whatever you want with your time. I choose to spend it on Twitter.
So people who are listening, please follow Ravi Handa on Twitter. You would not regret following him. If you have to follow one account on Twitter, please do that. Second would be mine. I obviously do a lot of replies, but yeah, his Twitter game is good. So Ravi, when you say retire early and financial independence, how much money does one require to retire early today?
So it depends on two key factors. A is how old are you right now? So the numbers for 30 versus the number for 40 versus the number for 50 would be different.
Okay.
Now, let's imagine a 40-year-old, because I've done these calculations for myself and I am
Yeah, let's
40.
take your example.
Yeah. So for a 40-year-old, you figure out how much money do you spend in a year. Now, there are expenses which would be there every month. Say, for example, your rent probably goes every month. Your kids' school fee probably goes every month. You multiply that number by 12 so that you get the
Okay.
annualized figure for that. On the other hand, there would be expenses which would happen maybe twice a year on your vacations. So you add that number, you annualize that. Then there would be expenses which probably happen once in a decade. Let's say you change a car every 10 years. So right now, if you have a car which is worth 20 lakh rupees, or you're planning to buy a car which is worth 20 lakh rupees, which would last 10 years, so you divide that by 10. So the annualized expenses for that becomes 2 lakh rupees. You figure out what all of these expenses are, and suppose you get a number which is X from it. So let's keep that X aside. That's one part of it.
Okay.
The other part of it is your one-time expenses that you see happening over the long run. Say, for example, one of the most common examples is you want to send your kid to US for studies, or you want your kid to do, an engineering and MBA in India, or you want to get your kid married in a lavish fashion. So whatever expenses that you see happening one time, you figure out that number, whatever it would cost in 2024. So you don't need to project that, okay, my kid is 5 years old, he'll probably enter into graduation 13 years from now. What the cost would be at that point of time, that's harder to figure out. But as of today, if you are looking at college A versus college B versus studies in the US, whatever is the current cost, you take the current cost of that, add up all of these, and then you get a Y. The amount of money that a 40-year-old would need will be 30x, that is 30 times the annualized expenses that you calculated,
Okay.
plus Y. So your number is going to come out as 30x plus Y. Let me take an example. So let's say if your current expenses come out to be 20 lakhs per year, and you don't want to, say, for example, someone like me who does not want to contribute to kids' marriage, but I do want to contribute to my kids' graduation in India, and even let's say post graduation. So 50 lakh rupees for the kids' education is enough. So to say, for today, for most engineering and MBA colleges, that would be the typical graduation. So the number for someone like me would come out as 30 times 20 lakhs, that is 6 crores, plus a 50 lakh, which is 6.5 crores.
5 crore.
That's the bare minimum, so to say. Above that, because it's a long journey, you will need to have some sort of buffers built into it. So maybe you add a 10% or a 20% buffer over it, whatever you are comfortable with. But 6.5 is a number that you can probably start from.
Okay. And how has that changed pre-pandemic and post-pandemic? Because pre-pandemic, I used to read that it is 25 years of expenses or 20 years of expenses, and then you
See,
assume some return.
I don't think that the number has changed pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic. It is just that post-pandemic, a lot of people have tried calculating these numbers for India.
Okay.
Whatever numbers that you are talking about, the 25x number that you are talking about, that essentially comes from a 1994 study that was done in the US. So
Okay.
now, when that study was done, considering the US market history over a very long period of time. US does not have the sort of inflation that India has. That is one. The stock market history or the bond history that exists in the US is again a lot longer. The Indian history is what, 30 years, 35 years right now. So
Yes.
25x was a number which was valid for US in 1994, and that was
4.
also valid for people who were 60 years of age at that point of time. So for a
Okay.
60-year-old in 1994, 25x was the number that was recommended. For a 40-year-old, the number switches to 30x. And those are the numbers that I'm going with.
So putting Canadian context to it, because a lot of people from Canada listen to me, I think that number, if you're 40-year-old, would be somewhere around 2.5 million Canadian dollar bare minimum, because your expenses, your mortgage payment, etc., would be included in there. But Ravi, quick question: when you included 30 years of expenses, do you also include the EMI of the house, or you assume that house is already owned by you before retiring?
So if you are on rent, then you should not really be pulling the plug on working. That's a fundamental idea that I have. So you take out the rent. So when you're
Okay.
calculating this X number, what you do is you take out the rent, you figure out that, okay, this is the house that I need to buy. So you take out the rent from that figure. In the Y part of it, that, okay, there is an 80 lakh house that I need to buy, or there is a 1.5 crore house that I need to buy. That number goes in the Y part of it, because that is a one-time expense that you would have. And I strongly
Okay.
believe that this is such a fundamental thing, owning a place to stay. I don't think it would be a very good idea to pull the plug on. So for financial independence, sure, because you can always adjust later. But if you're actually deciding to retire early, you should own a place.
So basically, all those financial influences that say that renting is better in the longer term, and you can always buy 10 years later. That's all in the Excel, but on the behavioral part, so I'm specifically stressing on the behavior part. That
Hmm.
behaviorally, does it make you nervous that you do not own a house and you're still renting it?
To me, it does, and to anyone who retires early, I'm sure it would do it to them as well. So you should continue to rent for a variety of reasons. Buying a house is not a great financial decision, let's be honest, because renting is a great idea. Now, buying the house makes a lot of sense when A, you are retiring, because presumably you will be living in the same location for a very, very long time. When you buy a house while you are still working, when you're 30 or 35 or 45, but when you're still working, if you buy a house in Noida, your job opportunities, the career growth that you can have, a lot of things get very, very limited. The choice of schools that you can send your kid to would also get fairly limited. So it acts as a restriction. Secondly, the real estate market in India is, well, it has improved over the last 10 years, but it isn't very, like an ideal market where you can sell very easily. A lot of cash is involved in that. Uh, there are plethora of problems that exist with the real estate market. So that's why also buying real estate, until and unless you are going to live in it for a very, very long time, is not a good idea. So the thumb rule, so to say, that I would suggest to anyone who's listening is, are you going to live in that particular house, in that particular flat for 10 years or more? So once you have a 10-year visibility of a place, sure, buy the house. Less than that, maybe you would move, maybe you'll get a different job, maybe you'll move to a different country. In that case, maybe buying the house is not really that good of an idea.
So a lot of influencers on fire I've seen on Instagram or otherwise, apart from, I mean, who try to sell these courses on retiring early, they say that when you retire early, you can travel the world or you can live in different places around the world. Does that seem realistic, or that's like just they want to sell the courses?
No, it is fairly realistic, I would say. If you have the money, sure, you should do that. But you can do that for a limited period of time. You will need to spend a substantial amount of time in whatever your base country is. Until and unless, you are keeping your base country as some other country when there is a different taxation that comes into the picture. I really don't know about that. But if you want to travel the world, even for 6 months, if you're outside India, you'll still spend 6 months in India.
In
So you
India?
will need a house here.
Okay. So how does one plan for an early retirement? As in, what are the so I in your case, I think you sold Handa Ka Funda to Unacademy, and a lot of details are available online about your corpus, etc. But let's say someone who's working in a job, how can they target or achieve this thing? Like, what should be the game plan? And let's say they are in their 30s right now, they're entering their 30s.
See, it's essentially a long term game. I do not recommend for to anyone that, okay, you have a number in your mind that once I hit that, I would retire. Yes, make some rough calculations, sure. You should not have a number in your mind. You should not have a year in your mind when you are very far away from the goal. So if you're in your 30s and you already have a chunk of money and you believe that, okay, maybe you will be able to retire by 35, sure, do the calculations and do the numbers and think about it very, very seriously. But if you do not have enough money right now and you're thinking that, okay, I'll do this for a 15-year period, I don't think that is a very wise thing to do. What you can do is what is in your control. In your control is a probably be a little more aggressive on your savings. Do not fly business class. Do not buy a fancy car. Stay within your limits and maybe try to save a little bit extra. And B, invest that money into the equity market. probably an 80-20 sort of a ratio should be good enough for most people, where 80% of your investments are going into the equity markets,
Pretty.
20% is going into bonds or NCDs or PPF or PF or any of the safe avenues which are available. You maintain an 80-20 ratio till you get to, let's say, a 70-75% of whatever your fire number is. So once you get close to it, 70%, 75% of it, that is when you seriously think about the other stuff. Planning, how you will plan your cash flows is very, very important. What sort of asset allocation you're going to have later, what sort of diversification you have. All of that would probably be 3 years, 4 years before you pull the plug. But for someone for whom fire is 10 or more years away, just put bulk of your money, 80% of your money into equity, and that should hopefully do the trick.
So a lot of time, I mean, and I think I've seen your tweets on what if equity market does not give any return. I mean, I've seen that you put in Japan or
Hmm.
Italy's chart, and I think even in Canada, the annualized return on TSX has been less than 4% a year for last 10 years.
Hmm.
So does that situation not haunt people that if they put their money in eighty
Well, if
percent
you're
equity?
prepared for it, it shouldn't. If you're prepared for it, it shouldn't. So, uh, about the Indian markets, so to say, I do believe that over the next 10 years, the Indian market is going to do fairly well. I don't really know what happens beyond the next 10. Now, I don't know whether the next 10 years it's going to give 15% or 12% or 8%, but I don't see the Indian markets giving 0% returns over the next 10 years. Having said that, I'm also aware that if I end up living till 80, then there will be a 10-year or a 5-year or a 7-year period where the equity markets will not give me any returns. So, what my portfolio is, what my asset allocation is, I'm prepared for that 7-year, 10-year period when the markets don't give any returns. Now, when you talk about I do not know about the Canadian market, but when you talk about the Japanese market, yes, it hasn't given any sort of significant enough returns over the last 20, 30-year period. But you also need to understand that there is virtually zero inflation that exists in
In that
Japan.
period, yeah.
So, when you are looking at the returns on your portfolio, as long as you're able to beat inflation with the help of your debt instruments or your equity instruments, that's good enough. Your portfolio should be able to beat inflation. Your goal should not be my portfolio should make 12% or 18% or 8%. My portfolio should be able to generate maybe 2% more than inflation. I would be happy. 3% I would be ecstatic. But you should be prepared for maybe even if you get a 1% or 2% over inflation over the long run, that should be good enough.
And in fact, Japan had a significant deflation in their housing prices from their peaks.
Correct.
S-
From the peaks,
So,
so that is essentially what. So the problem with the Japanese market, the stock market especially, is because Japan went into a huge bubble in the 80s,
yeah.
which was again reflected in the equity markets as well. That is why. It is not that the Japanese companies have not been performing well. It is the Japanese companies have been paying decent amount of dividends. So even if the stock market stays flat, you still keep on getting some dividends out of it. That is your return over the inflation which is there. Second, the other part of it is if you are following this sort of a financial independent sort of a lifestyle, you will not be limited in your investments to a geography. You can always have investments in I have investments in the US, for example. I have a little bit of investments in the European market as well. Then there are other asset classes that you can look at. So real estate is a completely different asset class. So you need to have a little bit of an exposure towards real estate. You need to have a little bit of an exposure towards gold, for example. These are all long-term inflation hedges. So yes, there will be periods when your bond market is not going to do well. Will be periods when equity is not going to do well. There will be periods when nothing is doing well. But if nothing is doing well for 7, 8 years, we will have much bigger problems than
I,
money
I
in
think if a
my
country is
portfolio
not doing well,
ranks
then
on the
yeah.
street. So
I think if your country is not doing well at all, then it will be a bigger problem than just your
it's
own.
just the financial returns. So to say.
Yeah, sure. Uh, so I think a lot of people talk about safe withdrawal rate. I've seen the discussion happening. So what is
Yeah,
that like? What does
it's
that
the
mean?
same
And
thing. Um, so let's say when we talk about that you need 25x of
yeah,
your portfolio, what you're talking about is essentially you have a 4% withdrawal rate. You divide 100 by 25. So that means every year you are withdrawing 4% from it. So why do you need 25x? Or why do you need 30x? So when you are talking about 30x, that means every year you will withdraw 3.33% from your corpus. Your corpus will
okay,
hopefully grow at a rate which is more than 3.33%. So you keep on withdrawing 3%. Your corpus growth would be a little bit more than 3.33%. That will take care of the inflationary, the inflation that exists. So, so suppose if you have 40 times your annual expenses, that means your safe withdrawal rate is going to be 100 by 40 or 2.5%. So how much money you need is one part of it. So suppose we decided that, okay, 6.5 crores is what I need right now, out of which 50 lakh is for my kids' education. Now, out of that 6 crore rupees, in the first year, I'm withdrawing 20 lakhs from it, or I'm withdrawing 3.33% from it. 10 years later, suppose that 6 crores has become 12 crores. Then I will still withdraw that 3.33% from it. I'll withdraw 40 lakhs from it. If today I can live with 40 lakhs, 10 years down the line, I should be able to live with, if today I can live with 20, 10 years down the line, I should be able to live with 40 lakhs. That's broadly what the safe withdrawal rate means.
again, a behavioral question. I've seen people
Hmm.
who work in these. So I know a lot of my friends who are family businesses doing money lending. So they lend
Hmm.
money and they live off the interest of that money. So I seen that they restrict a lot of their expenses because a thought comes into their mind is that, let's say that they can buy a 20 lakhs car, but they end up buying only 10 lakhs car because they think that this 10 lakhs will give them a 10,000 rupees per month interest. So
Hmm.
does that happen that behaviorally you become very, very defensive in your life?
I,
I
I
mean,
think
just
that's
a,
the greed talking. I don't think it's so. What you're talking about is you're coming from a fear perspective. I think most people who do this, they're coming from a greed perspective that, okay, let me make more money from it instead of spending it now. Let me make more money from it. Let me make more returns from it. But if you have done your numbers well, if you have the math right, then at the end of the day, you're still withdrawing. Maybe someone is doing 2.5, someone is doing 3.33, someone is doing 4%. These are small numbers on your portfolio. So when you talk about a 20 lakh car or a 10 lakh car, you're still talking about a 2 lakh rupee or a 1 lakh rupee annualized difference. I don't really think that's going to make a significant enough dent to your portfolio. And if it is making a significant enough dent to your portfolio, then your planning isn't in a
isn't
proper
well.
place.
Yeah. But then does behaviorally, like I think a lot of people are good at Excel math, they are good at having their portfolios, but a lot of behavioral or their previous experiences of how they are raised, they're not, they have the fear or greed, whatever you say. Like, how do you
Hmm.
overcome that in your mind? Like, you would also be having that fear in your mind, right? It's not that you are fearless at all times.
I- Absolutely. I do get doubts. I do get nervous. There is a certain amount of anxiety that comes in time to time whenever I'm taking a big financial decision, so to say. So I'm not saying that I'm completely devoid of it, but you read, you learn from the experiences of other people, you check, you double check the math. So, all that is there. The second part of it is that I have enough confidence in my abilities that in case something drastic happens, market changes or something like that, I will be able to adapt to that. So, for people who are not very financially literate, who have relied on others for making all of these calculations and all of these investments, which is true for a lot of people. That, okay, they know how to make money, but they are not really savvy with their financial decisions,
Investing that money.
investing decisions. So those guys would worry a lot more. So what I would suggest to anyone who would be on this path is, perhaps instead of relying on others, build your knowledge and then take a call on what you want to do, and that
Okay.
should
So
help take care. It'll not make your anxiety zero or something, but it would reduce it quite a lot.
so I'm almost at the end of my questions, but is there something that you would want to highlight to people that they end up missing in this puzzle, uh, on the Excel or on reading, that comes from your
It's it's
experience?
it's mostly the softer aspects that people keep missing. It's the softer aspects that I miss. That I thought that the value that I have in the society, it comes from me, who I am, how smart I am, how nice I am, how horrible I am, if I return your calls or not. But what I realize is that a lot of it comes from your job and what you are doing. So that becomes an issue. The second thing is how you are viewed by even people close to you, even your parents, even so who would. So your parents don't really interfere in your career after a certain age. But when you take a step like this, that becomes an issue even with your parents, because that is going, slightly off track, so to say. So a few others that I've spoken with respect to the early retirees, or people who were earning, let's say, 60 lakh rupees, and then they moved to a job of 15 lakh rupees, which is what they're comfortable doing. They move back to smaller cities or hometowns. That the way they connect and interact with the society, that is something that they are not prepared for. That is something that I was not prepared for, fairly honestly. So I was very confident with the math part of it, very confident with the finance part of it, but the social part of it, I didn't do it very well. I'm still learning. I'm trying to improve, but
Isn't
hopefully
that
I
a
will get
isn't
better
that
with
a
time.
very isn't that a very Indian thing that you're, even after having such a large corpus that you have, your prestige is linked to the job that you do or the work that you do, and not.
Absolutely, man. So in India, it is very much linked to your job and not really about the money. That's why you would find, uh, someone in a government job earning 30,000 rupees would be a lot more respected in society, and someone in a private job who's earning five times that. I mean, 30,000 rupees in a government job versus 1.5 lakh in a private job. I would today vote for the guy with the 30,000 rupees, and I consider myself to be a little more aware on how the society functions. But yes, it is linked to. It's not just the money. It is what your job, what's the sort of impact you are having, what's the sort of power that you have. How can you actually help the other guy? So once I'm out of a job, now I can be happy about myself that I can. But what can I do for you? Nothing. If I'm still working in a job, I can introduce you to a few people. I can introduce, maybe help you get hired. I will have enough number of connections where I can connect, uh, with whom I can connect you with. But that no longer exists once you're out of a job.
I think it's a very important point, and especially for people who think that they are going to retire in India, especially the NRIs, so to say, they should consider
Hmm.
this aspect, because
No, so the
the
NRIs,
moment.
I believe it's a different game for the NRIs, because there will always be NRIs. Because, the NRIs are anyways not helping anyone in India right now. The NRIs, if they were actually able to help people, would only be by getting iPhones and stuff like that, maybe help you with a visa or something like that. So the NRIs are anyway not helping anyone professionally in India right now.
But once they move back, I think the prestige tag of being an NRI, that I do not know if that's a prestige tag anymore or not.
It
But
is.
in their heads, it is.
I,
It
I
is.
it is definitely, man. I'm not saying that it is as prestigious as an IAS or an IIT or an IIM or a doctor, but I think number five, in my opinion, would be IAS, IIT, IIM, doctor. The fifth one is an NRI.
Yeah, but once they move back, I think they no longer have that tag with themselves,
They
right?
no
Because
longer have that tag, and yes, it so maybe it exists for the next 2 years, 3 years after moving back, but after 3 years, 2 years, yeah, you will lose that prestige, and you will, because now you can't even bring them the iPhones.
yeah, but thanks, Ravi, for answering these questions on early retirement and softer aspects. I hope people have found some value in this conversation. Please follow Ravi on Twitter. He keeps posting a lot of these things and definitely helpful.